Amir Bar-Lev and Eric Eisner, your new Amazon documentary series, Long Strange Trip About the Grateful Dead, is a fantastic journey into just a band that is a legend unto themselves. And Amir and Eric, where did the idea come from to do a documentary about the Grateful Dead?
Eric, you want to start?
Oh, I want you to start that one.
Okay. Well, Eric and I are both fans and have been since we were teenagers. But I think really from the outset, we didn't want to make this from the perspective of our own fandom. We felt like, most sort of hagiographic music documentaries that kind of march through one album and then the next album and the next album and are there to kind of provide an encyclopedic chronology of a band, don't function so well as storytelling. So, part of being a Dead fan, I think, is also being aware of the fact that however you feel about the music, they have a fantastic story, a story that, has, is very unique. It doesn't kind of contour to the sort of behind the music, 70s, they all got on drugs and then they got their act together and came out with a, comeback album or whatever. It's a very unique story, unlike any others. And it has to do with interesting things. I mean, before we got on the air, you mentioned Happy Valley about Joe Paterno, a film I'd done earlier. This story, like that story, has to do with a kind of a community culture that's built from nothing and almost becomes a religion in the same way Penn State football did. And it's not so great to be at the center of that religion, as it wasn't so great for Jerry Garcia. And there's a lot of really fascinating kind of utopian aspirations and foibles and just hilarity and sex, drugs, and rock and roll in this story. So we tried to come at it from the position of being storytellers more than anything else.
I mean, I guess to add on to that, I think we went away from the conventional norms of the stereotypical Grateful Dead. What do you think of the Grateful Dead and Jerry Garcia? At its core, it's kind of punk rock and anti-authoritarian, and I think that's what the band was. So we think it really appeals to all kind of quadrants, or all people that don't know who the Dead are to the kind of super fan Deadheads. We wanted to not go for the obvious, let's say.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the most gratifying things. I'll shut up. But one of the gratifying things for Eric and I, because we are fans, is that we're constantly hearing, I'm not a fan, but I love this story. I love this movie, and you don't have to be a fan to like this story. And we can get into this more, but we surrounded ourselves with non-fans, really. Like I think there's maybe three. Well, there's equal parts fans and not fans in our crew, and there's some people on our crew, close to the crew, that really couldn't be bothered to listen to a full Grateful Dead song all the way through. So it was a good barometer for us. Like if something belonged in the film, it had to belong in the film because it made sense both to fans and to not fans. And I think a lot of times with music docs, you're kind of being spoon-fed like your spinach, you need to know this. If you're going to know this, you need to know this about this band. We didn't feel like there was anything that necessarily needs to be in there. And in fact, from our fellow Deadheads, we take a lot of crap, sometimes like, why didn't you put that album in? Or how could you do it without this story or whatever? And it's because, we just wanted to craft like a well-told story, more so than to cover every single shit in their 50-year story.
So actually, Eric was telling me before we started that this originally started as a 90-minute piece, and now it has evolved into nearly 6-hour, 6-part docu-series.
Yeah.
How did it go from being initially that short a format to being necessary to tell it in that long format?
Well,
Answers?
go ahead.
I was joking. I said, good fighters. I was able to understand that Amir needed more room to edit this story. It's a 50-year story encompassing a lot of things, and Amir laid out the best 4 hours that told this element of the story. So a team that believed in our team.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you know, there were a lot of challenges. One of the challenges was just that we got we realized early on that it was going to take a lot more time, and you know, time equals money. So so that was where our producing team, especially Eric, you know, was able to kind of give the creative side the cover it needed, which, you know, doesn't happen all the time. So it was we were able to act improvisationally like the band we were telling a story about, you know, and to deviate pretty considerably from our original plan. And you know, not to get totally granular, but we did a lot of, we spent 3 years editing this film and for this series, and we didn't even know it was going to be broken up the way it was going to get broken up until you know, some years into it. And part of what happened was we got really excited by fine cutting we had a huge amount of material, right? So you normally when you have a huge amount of material, you sort of like you shave it in broad strokes, like a sculptor would just like, well, I think the head will be somewhere over here and the tail will be somewhere over there. But we didn't do that. We basically like started in on an eyeball or whatever and made it perfect, and then moved over here and started, you know, sculpting that part of it, because we wanted the film's medium to be musical, not just its subject matter. So we tried to create, you know, a kind of a storytelling aesthetic that felt like the band's music, conversational and sometimes just digressive and, you know, playful. And you can't really approximate that stuff. You just have to kind of do it. So we were just sort of keeping our heads down and, you know, doing this fine cutting. And we got to a place where the film was 2 hours long and it was only 1974. So we had to go back to a financier and say, we're going to need a little more time.
One other thing that I thought was interesting is, so in the credits you can see that Martin Scorsese is listed as an executive producer. How did he come to be a part of this project?
Through friends. He kind of endorsed the project through Nick Koskoff and Emma Koskoff that worked with him. He kind of became the godfather to the project and really got behind the filmmaking team and kind of represented the filmmaking team in relationship with the band. And once kind of he got on board, the band really trusted that we knew what we were talking about, and especially Amir.
And so, you know, I always think it's interesting that you two came onto this project as fans of the Grateful Dead. And I'm wondering, for each of you, what was the most surprising thing that you learned about the Dead during the making of this series?
We knew a lot coming in. It's good.
Yeah.
What do you think, Amir? It's a good
yeah,
one.
I mean, I could just, for me, it was, and maybe I speak for both of us, you know, we the kind of guys who've been like steeped in all the books and everything, right? So we understood a lot of the facts, but seeing them play out in the material that we found, you know, that's one of the really fun things about documentary filmmaking is, you know, there's sort of like the idea, and then there's the idea as it expresses itself in real material. And I don't know, for myself, the material that we found was a constant surprise. You know, we found a home movie that they made in 1970 of their first trip to Europe that was incredibly shot, beautiful, very intimate, interviews with Pigpen that nobody had ever seen, but also just a lot of rambunctious kind of goofiness, including the reason it's never been seen is that they dose the camera crew with LSD because they don't like being studied. They want to have, like, if you're going to be following us around, we're kind of, you know, you got to join the fun. So they basically surreptitiously gave the camera crew acid, and then and then Jerry basically tells the camera crew, you know, you don't have to keep filming. You can go off and have fun. And that's exactly what they do. They put their cameras down, and the last thing you see is they're like literally on their backs being kind of like babysat by the band. And so there were a lot of things like that. There's like a love story that was recorded on, there's a kind of Dickensian love story where one of Jerry's first girlfriends, who he didn't see for 30 years, went away and then came back into his life once he had become this huge star, problematically for him. And they recorded a first conversation they had on audio tape, and it's almost unbearably intimate, you know, like he's basically saying, I kind of want out, you know, I don't like this life. You know, I want to catch back up to where you last saw me in early 60s and not be a superstar. And so there were lots of things like that, you know, like just incredible discoveries that put flesh on the bone, you know, to this story. I'm on the phone. I'm on there.
There's one thing for me that I know that was
sorry,
interesting. No, to learn is that, you know, there was always when we were seeing them and later on and knowing them, it was the reluctant leader of Garcia, but to see earlier on and what was achieved in interviews is all of them talking about their initial kind of meeting of Garcia and how they kind of attached themselves to him because they saw him going somewhere. So yeah, it was really interesting to hear it come from the horse's mouth about these guys finding a light with Garcia and how bright it was early on and just kind of following him. And I found that interesting.
One of the things, like, you know, we did a lot of talking about was, you know, you could make an 8-hour movie, you know, but obviously you have to kind of figure out what the contours of your storytelling is and art. And a lot of times I would say, like, we can't afford that. And Eric would say, like, no, you got to put this in, or you got to put that in. And there's some, I think one of the things that Eric especially was sort of committed to is, like, let's tell this is not a band, like it's not the Grateful Dead is not the members on stage. Grateful Dead is a kind of a collective, you know, and the roadies are as important, you know, the manager, you know, so you have to tell the story as you would tell the story of a collective, you know, and so we ended up, like, you know, some of the stars of the film are people that are not that familiar to you if you just know, you know, the band members, but like the roadie, like the sort of the infamous biker-like roadie, Steve Parrish, or, you know, they're kind of
in to expand and in not going for the obvious, we didn't have other musicians. This was an Amir decision early on, which I thought was very smart, and I supported the whole way through. And we were not going to have other musicians speak about the Grateful Dead and other celebrities speak about the Grateful Dead. Our celebrities in our world were the Grateful Dead family, the collective. So that's who we went out to interview. And everybody else should be watching and learning about the collective. So I think that was a big deal.
So one of the other, my other favorite things in the movie was talking about when the people started talking about Robert Hunter coming on board as a lyricist, and how every one of them was saying, you know, he's not going to talk to you. And then you end up getting him on camera. How difficult was that?
Split second.
Yeah. How difficult was it to get Robert Hunter to appear on camera for this?
Well, I think that's one of the really cool thing about these folks is that they really have a genuine humility. And, you know, so they're not out there trying to, you know, get in front of cameras all the time. And then they also understand that, you know, you can kind of leech the magic out of a thing if you talk about it too much, if it's got poetry, you know. And Robert Hunter, the guy who wrote, you know, half their lyrics, you know, he doesn't like to be asked, you know, what's the real meaning of the song, you know, tell us what that's really about, whatever, because he wants, you know, as we said earlier, like the Grateful Dead was a collective, and the fans were a participant in that collective, and the fans, you know, each had their own set of meanings to the songs, you know, meanings that maybe are personal to whatever, you know, associations they have from their own life story and stuff like that. So Robert Hunter always wanted to be to allow for that by not kind of telling everybody, oh, well, this is what it's really about, this woman I met, or blah blah blah. So, you know, when we were trying to not just explain the Grateful Dead, but also enact the Grateful Dead, right? So that by the end of this film or this series, when you've seen it, you may not even love the Grateful Dead. Hopefully you do, but you definitely understand it. You get what your wife or your husband has been going on about, or your stepdad. You know, you're like, okay, now I get it. And so one of the things we tried to do, so in a situation like that where everybody's telling you he's not going to talk, he's not going to talk, you know, we of course tried to get him to talk, but at the same time, after a while, we started to realize maybe we don't really want him to talk. You know, maybe he's better in our film as a kind of a cipher, right? So when we did get in front of him, we basically we were like, uh-oh, what do we say? You know, what are we going to do? So I actually, Ken Dornstein, who did a lot of the interviews, came up with the idea, let's just ask the worst possible question, because it'll give us a good answer. You know, it'll give us an answer that enacts the Grateful Dead, and people will like viscerally understand, more so than if you had some celebrity saying like, now this guy Robert Hunter, he was one of the greatest lyricists. Let's get him to basically slam the door on us. So we asked him, you know, I said to him, look, Robert, I know how much you love explaining your songs, facetiously. So tell us, what is Dark Star, which is one of their most enigmatic koan-like songs. I asked him, like, come on, lay it out. Tell me what that really is all about. And I'll leave it to your viewers to watch it. It's in episode 5, what really happens there.
Yeah, it's a real treat.
Yeah. So what we were able to do is, like, I mean, that was another fun thing, is that, like, as we've been working on, we worked on this for so long, it really took us about 14 years, that the distinctions between film and series and television and cinema are sort of blurring in wonderful and exciting ways. You know, television's becoming more filmic, you know, and you can do what, you know, you couldn't do, like, even probably when we started it, which is to, like, tell things in a cinematic way, but over a serial, you know, like, make certain episodes longer, shorter, you know, each episode having its own concern and its own sort of storytelling device and stuff like that. It was really lovely to work that way. And so, you know, I think
this is where timing really does work out with these projects, and it worked out with the band wanting to tell their legacy. But what Amir is saying, and I totally agree with, is that kind of technology at the same time was catching up with the project. And as we were working on it, all these longer formats, like Making of a Murderer, had come out, The Jinx had come out, kind of these new docu-series things, and we saw the pivot to that. So it was kind of organically came together. So a very Grateful Dead-like.
Well, Amir and Eric, I can't thank you enough for this. The series is Long Strange Trip. It's on Amazon Prime. And best of luck to you guys during the Emmy season.
Thanks so much, Mr. Charlie.
Thank you, Mr. Charlie. Much appreciated.